Hello, I'm Gwen Eiffel. Welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. I'm joined around the table by Dan Balz of the Washington Post, Susan Davis of USA Today, Greg Ip of The Economist, and Pete Williams of NBC News. Dan, we want to start by talking about the optics of today's press conference. Why does the president do these?
Because he's going off for, 15 days? He's going to be completely out of the news, and it's an opportunity to lay down one last marker before the end of the year, and particularly at a time like this when there are a lot of questions about his standing. I think they feel it's always useful if he's out there and can defend himself and make some points.
But are they effective? He comes out, he says, I believe the economy is a great thing, and every question's about, are you having the worst, the best, the worstest worst, or the worstest worstest time of your life?
Well, they knew that. I mean, they
had to.
They knew all the questions that they were going to get on that front. I don't think it makes much difference. I think people have a view of I don't think many people actually watch this press conference.
Yeah.
People will read a little bit about it. But as I say, I think they feel that better to do that than to sort of slip away silently and have people say, well, what happened to him? And why didn't he, why isn't he being stronger as a leader?
I think it was one of those press conferences where George W. Bush got the legacy question and got really annoyed at it. And it turns out that people got the headline they needed as a result. Sue, I want to talk to you about a member of the Senate. Senate Finance Committee Chairman Max Baucus from Montana is off to China, apparently. Was this a surprise?
It was a surprise. The initial reaction was surprise, and then when you think about it, it starts to make a lot of sense.
I should say ambassador to China.
Yes, and he still has to be not confirmed by the Senate, but right. Senators don't really have sitting senators don't tend to have a hard time getting the approval of the club. But it does make sense. Max Baucus had already announced he wasn't going to run for re-election. Montana could be a hugely significant state in 2014. They have a Democratic governor. Once he vacates the seat, the Democratic governor will be able to nominate a candidate to fill out his term. It's widely believed he's going to nominate John Walsh, who is the leading Democratic candidate in that race, giving him the edge in the 2014 elections, in which Democrats are working very hard to keep the majority, and in which Barack Obama has a very vested interest in maintaining at least one control of Congress and Democratic control.
I see all the political reasons. I wonder about the China reasons.
The substantive ones, I'm not entirely sure were the driving one of this. Also, it's important to note that one of the staffers that was important in sort of making this happen is Jim Messina, who was a campaign manager for Barack Obama, who's also a former top-level Baucus staffer. And when people like Messina come up with these ideas, I don't think Messina is known for his foreign policy prowess as much as he is his political savvy.
It's Montana, cradle of U.S. ambassadors to Asian countries. Mike Mansfield.
Mike Mansfield, that is
true. And as Senate Finance Committee, he does have a portfolio over trade. He was hugely significant in the 90s, getting China into the World Trade Organization. He played a major role in PNTR. I mean, he certainly has a policy record that makes him a fit that no one's going to, it's not a question of qualifications, but it's qualifications and the right politics is a perfect eclipse
it's not like
for this
there
nomination.
Aren't ambassadors. I won't name any names around the world without a whole lot of previous experience in the countries where they currently assigned for lots of different reasons. Greg, I want to ask you about, we ended the regular program by talking a little bit about Ben Bernanke. Let's compare his swan song to Alan Greenspan's swan song. They were very different kinds of men, weren't they?
They really are. I mean, Greenspan, of course, ended on what at the time seemed like a real high note, being called the greatest Federal Reserve chairman ever. And of course, we know that he left behind an economy that was about to go into a very deep recession and a crisis. Now, nobody who's thought about it carefully thinks Alan Greenspan is entirely to blame for that, but there's no question that Ben Bernanke had a lot of sort of cleaning up to do, both on the regulatory side, on the monetary policy side, on the economic side, as a consequence of all of that. And Greenspan also has not tended to sort of take a lot of sort of blame for anything, and he has tended to cite like much bigger factors going on. And more recently also he has become quite vocal, being somewhat critical of things that, for example, the current administration has done with respect to regulatory policy, Dodd-Frank and so forth. He's talked more urgently about the problems with the deficit. It'll be interesting to see whether, as Bernanke rides off into the sunset, whether he will adopt a lower profile or whether he too will continue to speak out on issues that are important to him, whether it's monetary or fiscal.
Pete, I want to talk to you about another story we didn't have room to get to in the main broadcast, but which I found interesting this week. Often at the end of the president's year, he has an opportunity to pardon people. This has been controversial in the past. What this president did this week was commute the sentences of 9 people who were in jail on crack cocaine charges. What was that about?
Well, I think this administration has made a big deal about the disparity in sentencing for crack versus powder cocaine, and trying to deal with that. It seemed entirely consistent with that concern. You may remember that Eric Holder, the Attorney General, earlier this year, instructed U.S. attorneys to stop putting into the charges the amount of drugs involved if they would trigger mandatory minimums. So there's no question that the sentencing policies on cocaine have disproportionately affected African Americans. The numbers tell that story, and the administration has been very much trying to fix that.
And this was actually putting their money where their mouth is on this particular issue. Right.
The president was also asked, we did talk about this on the broadcast a little bit, about the sort of yeasty question about whether it would be a good idea to give amnesty to Edward Snowden. Now, this came up because John Miller of CBS asked one of the officials at NSA who's on the review, you know, given the fact that Snowden has all this stuff that still hasn't been leaked out, why not make a deal and say, come on home, we won't charge you, and stop the leaks? The head of the NSA said he thought that was a bad idea, and the president made it pretty clear that he's not going for that either. And we've heard the same signal from the Justice Department.
It seems strange that the NSA would even open the door to the possibility. I think that's what...
Well, they're just tired of the leaks. They feel battered.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. We'd all talk longer, but we have shopping left to do. So we'll see you next time on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.